Start streaming. 9, 10. Okay. I was just doing a test there to see if it would start streaming instantly. Looks like it did, with a delay to accommodate that. Alrighty. Hitting start recording. Dan here, MaxSPL Videos. Doing another live stream one while I procrastinate editing some of the videos I've got in the works. But yeah. Let's take a look at some speaker specifications. So if you are a new sound tech, or if you are a new DJ, you're in a band and you're trying to put together a PA system, that kind of thing, you're going to find there's a lot of numbers involved. So understanding those can really help make it easier to narrow the search down. As almost always, I recommend two things. Number one, getting used stuff, perfectly fine, okay? So if you are looking at a set of, say, used speakers and you're going by the manual or the spec sheet to see, okay, how do they stack up in modern context and stuff, that's a good way to do it. But much like number two, it is always best to listen to a set of speakers before you purchase them. So if you are hopping on, Facebook Marketplace, eBay, that kind of thing, if your Facebook Marketplace, actually, for one of the few times I actually would say this, is probably a better place to go looking for speakers than ordering online. Or alternatively, go to your local, audio or music store and listen to them, because JBL speakers have a very specific sound compared to, say, Yorkville speakers. I personally love the sound of QSC speakers. I've got a set of them. I've also got a set of EV speakers. They're great too. My Yorkville speakers, I don't think sound as good as my QSC speakers, even though on paper they should probably sound better. But I trust my Yorkville speakers out on rentals more because of certain durability stuff going on there, right? So there's other factors and stuff involved. But yeah, always best to go and take a listen. But if you have to go by a spec sheet, or if you're trying to narrow down your search, the onslaught of numbers can be a bit much. So we're going to look at a few spec sheets today, go over what the numbers are saying and things like that, and see if we can make sense of some of this stuff. So, as you might be able to see in the top corner here, we are looking at the original SRM450 from Mackie. These speakers were incredibly popular when they came out because they were one of the big first consumer available powered speakers. DJs were using them all over the place. Bands were using them quite a bit because they sounded pretty good. They were pretty darn reliable for the time, and they were light. That was the big thing. So let's take a look at some specs while my phone goes off. I'll edit this out later, but what was that? Oh, okay, just somebody replying to a text message from yesterday. Frequency response. Now, this number tells us a bit, but it's not the end-all be-all. We want to know these numbers, but don't expect that, hey, it says that it goes down to 55 hertz. Cool. That means it's going to have way better low frequencies than something that says, say, 57 or something like that. It doesn't quite work like that, but generally you can use this as a good guide. Now, what this is the lowest frequency and the highest frequency that is being produced without dipping below 3 decibels of like the curve here. So that is very handy to know. Now 3 dB is kind of where the human ear starts to notice a change in volume, and that's why it is such a good stat. It's one of the reasons, as much as I love my QSC speakers, and I do still like the QSC, it was the K12 point, whatever it is now. I'm really annoyed at them because they moved to -6 for some reason. It makes their speakers just impossible to compare spec sheet to spec sheet. So just going back to what I was saying earlier, don't just use a spec sheet to tell you which speaker to buy. There's ways to manipulate numbers and stuff, and there's ways to do things non-industry standard and whatnot that can make your, put your best foot forward. Cool, I guess, but bit of a problem, bit of an annoyance. So anyway, -3 here, that's what that means. Generally, higher it can go, lower it can go, the better. A speaker not going to 20 kilohertz on the -3, not a big deal. I would almost largely ignore the top number until you start to see it starting to get to about 15. Once you're seeing 15 kilohertz, even though most adults, there's actually a test tone you can run where you can slowly but surely up the frequencies coming out of your speaker to see where you stop hearing it. A lot of adults can't actually hear above. I've met some that can't hear above 15. I think my hearing caps out around the 18 mark these days, but I haven't tested it in a while. So don't be too worried, especially for live sound purposes. For like home theater or like my stage or studio monitors I got in front of me, I wouldn't consider this an acceptable number. For live, don't sweat this. 15, starting to get a little iffy. Anything under 15, I'd probably avoid it unless it's for very, very specific purposes. Now this -10, same idea as this -3, right? It's rolling off. So if you're, say, playing 115 decibels out of your speaker setup, your 45 hertz are going to be 10 decibels lower than that. Not perfect math. That's not exactly how this is all calculated because it's all on spectrums and stuff, and at different volumes this number is going to be slightly different, etc. So again, don't just trust that, it's going to be pretty good. It is important though, because say you're running something like this 450 here, which I believe the 450 had a 12-inch speaker in it. Knowing how low it can go can be really important and really nice to know, because if, say, you're using it without a subwoofer, then you know, okay, at least I'm getting some stuff in that range. Higher number here, or lower number here rather, again, better. Higher number here, better. Again, the high frequency one, not as important unless it's getting really, really low. And this doesn't tell us anything about how harsh the speaker sounds. It doesn't really tell us the quality of the bass frequencies. Even if you see it on a proper chart where it shows you exactly where you've got peaks and valleys, these numbers are not what to buy your speaker based on, but they are really handy to know, especially if you're trying to decide between, say, a 15 and a 12, and you're just trying to think like, okay, a 12 might fit better in my car, right? Or, honestly, the big thing for me, I love 12-inch speakers. 15s do put out more bass frequencies. If you're going to be using with a subwoofer, well, these numbers start to matter a lot less again, but if you're not going to be using it with a subwoofer, these become more important. But that's what the frequency response stuff is. Carrying on, we get to what I named my channel after, maximum SPL. Now, they don't tell us these two numbers very often anymore, which is really annoying, because it used to be, it was so nice that they would give you this long-term maximum sound pressure level. 124 dB. Now, if you're new to this stuff, decibels are not as linear as other things. 10 decibels plus or minus is going to be a doubling or a halving of volume. So 114 decibels sounds to us half the volume as 124. Now, when they're saying long term here, that means not clipping. That means it's going to actually be able to put out 124. Peak is broadly a pointless number when it comes to sound pressure levels, but they do put it down because then it tells us roughly where it could possibly really cap out at. But I would largely ignore peak numbers unless it's all you have. And a good rule of thumb is the continuous is probably going to be somewhere between 3 and 6 decibels less than the peak. So if the only thing they tell you is peak, knock off about somewhere between 3 and 6, and you're probably in your ballpark of what the speaker can actually do. I miss these days of long term, or sometimes it'll say continuous. Peak, again, this number, nearly useless. Ignore it. Now, crossover is an important number sometimes. Most of the time, you can largely ignore this. If one speaker has a crossover at a different spot, it's not going to be a big deal. But this is the point where in a two-way speaker system, your low range speaker and your high range speaker, right? Your compression driver up top, and then you got your big woofer at the bottom, where it crosses those frequencies over. Now, if you haven't looked at a crossover on a graph before, it is exactly that. It crosses over. It's not a perfect line. They cross over a bit. So that's what the 24 dB / octave means. That's how drastically the slopes go. Higher and lower being better. Again, I would never pick a speaker over a different speaker based on this number, but it is good to know what it is, and I'm glad that companies generally tell us them. The other time it becomes really important is if you're dealing with a passive speaker that can be bi-amped and things like that, but that's a whole nother world. We're going to be mostly talking today about powered / active speakers because that's most of the market. Now, input stuff, balanced versus unbalanced, that's more of a cabling thing. A lot of modern speakers and stuff have way more than these older ones did. So like this is saying balanced, and then has like, hey, here's your input impedance. You don't have to worry about those kind of things unless you are buying a speaker for the purpose of, say, plugging in your microphone and plugging in a electric acoustic guitar. Then the impedance stuff starts to matter. Largely ignore it. Same thing with sensitivity stuff. You don't have to care about those. If a speaker can't accept mic signals and stuff, then this number stuff can start to matter. Or if you're read your manual. If you're not supposed to plug a microphone into the back, if it's only supposed to be accepting line level, then just don't expect it to do that. That's all this number stuff here means. Now, low frequency cutoff, that in this case is probably referring to the microphone input, but sometimes you'll have, similar to the crossover I mentioned up here, sometimes you will have a roll-off button or a crossover button or a switch that will knock the low frequencies out of your top speakers, assuming you have a subwoofer underneath. Very handy to have, especially, so this is saying 75 hertz for this, like that's what's telling me it's probably for the microphone. My QSC speakers, I quite like it. They have a 100 hertz switch on the back that puts a big drop for everything under there. And then my subwoofer, its crossover point is 100 hertz. So I don't actually have to route my audio through a crossover in that system. I can run everything everywhere and it all gets along. So that's where numbers and stuff like this start to matter. But if you're using a crossover, or if it has an adjustable one and things like that, or if your subwoofer has like a crossover out on it and stuff, then this stuff starts to not matter as much. Carrying on, power amplifiers. Now, again, this is dealing with a active speaker. Now, rated power is continuous RMS wattage into transducers, rated impedance at 1 kilohertz to the high frequency and 100 hertz to the low frequency. So the way that's the way they're basically rating these is they send a test tone that is 1 kilohertz and they send a test tone that is 100 hertz. That's why sometimes these numbers seem unintentionally, shall we say, inflated. Nowadays, they purposefully do in a lot of ways. But essentially, they're only running a single frequency through it to see how high they can output wattage from it. Yeah. These are actually very trustworthy numbers, though, because they're actually telling us how they got them. A lot of modern speakers don't. Again, QSC has been annoying me a bit because they're manual. I might even bring that up later because it's a little bit painful. But that is where they're actually getting these. And I do like that this is a bi-amped speaker. So if you were ever looking into PA speakers, oftentimes really inexpensive ones are essentially taking a passive speaker and shoving a power amp into the back of it. And the crossover and stuff is left over. So the electrical signal from your, or the speaker level signal from your power amp is like a single thing. It goes in and the crossover in there splits it up. A bi-amped signal has some major benefits because you can really control what's going where. So this essentially has two amplifiers, one that's putting out 300, one that's putting out 100 roughly. Again, this is only on a single frequency, so it's probably not able to quite do that on like pink noise, which is pink noise is kind of like all frequencies at once. That's where they're getting this stuff from. And yeah, this is bi-amped, two amplifiers. Highly recommended. If a modern speaker isn't bi-amped, I don't know if I would recommend it, with some maybe minor caveats to that. But it would have to be for a really good reason. The level of control and protection this can give you, because it's just a really good idea to have bi-amped if you can. And it can have advantages in sound quality as well. And also in terms of things like if you ever look into frequency responses, the best example of this, I believe, is JBL. They have some passive speakers that have the same speakers in them, like all the same components as their active counterparts, same model numbers, same boxes, everything, except one has a bi-amped amplifier in the back, and the other has a spot to plug a speaker cable into. You'll get better low frequencies coming out of the bi-amped and active JBL speaker. So sometimes that can be a really good idea to go for a powered speaker because of that. I've recorded a video on powered versus passive like 3 or 4 times, and I just keep thinking, like, you know what, it probably doesn't really matter. It's a case of they both have pluses and minuses, but 99% of the time I'm going to recommend people go with powered unless, like, I like passive for stage monitors, for example, because then I'm running one less cable over the stage. Your mileage may vary. But yeah, that's wattage and bi-amping and all that. Transducers is generally the technical term for the speakers, basically, like the actual pieces that are making the sound in there. Voice coil diameters, total diameter, right? It's a 12-inch speaker, but the voice coil is 2.5 inches. I've heard some debates over, this size is better than this one in terms of voice coil diameter. I would never, again, spec sheet to spec sheet, if one has a 3-inch voice coil and another has a 2 and one's at a 2.5, that doesn't really tell me which speaker is going to be better. So I would never base your purchase off of that. However, it does have some implications in terms of how the low frequency driver is going to sound, but very hard to say one's better than the other. Again, this is why I highly recommend taking a listen to the speaker rather than just saying, oh, I heard 2.5 inch is like the sweet spot and I should be, no, just go with the ones that sound the best. Now, sensitivity, I'm amazed that this is on here. They don't tell you this on active speakers anymore. They do on the passive speakers. This is how efficient basically the speaker is. 98 dB, that means if you put 1 watt in, you should be able to get roughly 98 decibels of volume if you put your reader at a meter away from the cone. That's actually really good. I have some speakers that are 99. I have some speakers that are 93. This is very, very high in terms of efficiency for a low frequency driver. That's really, really good. It's one of the top reasons why I've been piecing together a video on car audio for pro audio purposes and why generally it's a bad idea. And one of the big reasons, I've looked into some car audio subwoofers that are like 84 dB at 1 meter. Now, this is important. So, SPL calculator. Let's say we've got our transducer here that's 98. And we're giving it 1 watt at 1 meter. Away from the walls. You get 3 dB having things on the floor. If you're trying to deal with this math for a subwoofer specifically, you can keep this always on close to wall because let's face it, your subwoofer is probably going to be on a floor. But anyway, for demonstration's sake. Now, as we were talking earlier, and I wish I could make this bigger, but as we were talking earlier, 10 decibels is roughly double the volume. Now, if I double our wattage, we didn't get 10 decibels. We got 3. Double our wattage again. Double our wattage again, right? We're starting to add up. So we started at 1. If we want to actually add 10 decibels, we got to add a 0 to it. We got to 10 times it. That's where you actually double your volume. So that's one of the reasons why I never recommend worrying too much about the wattage numbers when you see it, because a 1,000-watt speaker, in theory, could put out, say, 120 decibels or 128 decibels, but a, say, 300-watt speaker is only, what is that, 5 decibels quieter? So wattage numbers and the inflation of them isn't too big of a deal. However, remember I was talking about how I saw some subwoofers that were 85? So at 300 watts, we're getting 123 decibels, or just shy of that. 85, we're at 109. So 109 versus 122, over double the volume by having a more efficient speaker without changing the power. So that's what that means. Now, there's a different sensitivity on the low and the high. That's another reason why it can be really nice to have biamping, because if you have different numbers here, the crossover should be preventing, you sending 500 watts to your top. That's kind of how it works. Yeah. And then they're talking about program. Now, if you haven't dealt with RMS program and peak before on passive speakers, RMS and program are kind of the sweet spots of what you should probably be pumping into the speakers. And then up top above it is peak, that we should largely ignore, but it's an okay number to know, because the higher the peak is, the better the speaker is at generally handling transients, right? Those really quick sounds that tend to be loud. So things like a acoustic guitarist forgetting to check with you before they unplug their cable and pop my tweeters. Ask me how I know that. So that's what these numbers generally mean. The ohms, if you're dealing with active speakers, you don't really have to worry about ohms at all. They're taken care of for you, but that is the resistance, right? The impedance here. If you're trying to match an amplifier to a speaker, you have to pay attention to these and like trying to figure out, okay, do I run these in series or parallel and all that kind of crap? But powered speakers, I'm actually, again, they don't actually usually tell you this anymore until you really dive into like replacement parts. Horn design and things like that. That is, so your high frequency driver. There's actually a really, really good video where somebody has like the driver outside of the horn and then moves it into a horn, and it completely changes the sound. Conical just means like it's a cone, right? Instead of just 4 walls coming out and stuff. Mouth size. Again, none of these numbers are things that you should care about, in my opinion. In terms of what is making one speaker better or worse than another, trust your ears, not, oh, I heard that a like proper cone is better than having like those sharp angles. Maybe. Listen to the speakers. If a speaker is well designed, then they will be using whatever the best choice is for that speaker. It's not that one way of building a horn design is better than all the others. I'm sure there's someone out there arguing that, but largely ignore it. What does matter is the coverage. So horizontal coverage is exactly as it sounds. That's how wide it sends the sound out. Vertical coverage is how tall it sends the sound out. Sometimes you will see, and hopefully they'll have a diagram for it if it's a case in a speaker, where they actually aim the wave guide, instead of being the same top and bottom, it'll be kind of aimed to have the sound come down. Larger numbers generally better, but not the end all be all. 90-45, I've seen 90-30 for vertical coverage as well. 90 is kind of like the industry standard almost. These numbers you can take into consideration a bit for use cases. Anything between about 30 and 50 for vertical coverage probably is going to be fine. 30 is starting to get a bit too narrow for some, but it also depends on what you're using it for. One of the big places where this number starts to really matter, this vertical coverage, is stage monitors. Stage monitors, these numbers start to really matter. And you'll notice if you ever look up, say, a speaker that has a dual purpose, where they have can lay it on its side and use it as a stage monitor, versus a dedicated, this is just a stage monitor. If they make two different versions, they'll actually have like all the specs will be basically the same except for these, because they changed the horn design to make for a better stage monitor. When I reviewed my EV speakers a bit ago, that was one of the things I was saying, is that unless I found a really good deal, which I did, on some all-purpose speakers that could double as working as both, I was considering going straight for just plain old, these are only stage monitors. But I found some Yorkville YX15s, and those are now my stage monitors because I can also use them as mains. So, and to me, that was worth the sacrifice of not being the best stage monitor. But that's one of the reasons why you'll hear sound techs talking about how there are some speakers that are just, you want a stage monitor to be a stage monitor, not to be a dual purpose. That's what they're getting at, is this stuff, generally speaking. A lot of these other specs and stuff, take it or leave it. When it comes to stage monitors and stuff, this stuff starts to matter. For general DJing, or if you're a live band, just getting your front of house stuff, again, unless they're doing something really weird, or somebody's like, oh, well, I have a set of stage monitors, can I use them as mains? This is the number then to check. Okay, but for the most part, you're fine there. Now, input power and stuff, this matters if you're doing overseas trips and whatnot with your speakers and whatnot. A lot of modern stuff actually will have the IEC plug in the back, or the power con or whatever. They'll have a power supply that has like a switch on the back, and you always want to make sure it's on the right setting. Because for some reason, we've got, it's Technology Connections has like some good videos on this stuff of how like we have different numbers depending on where you are. And like US and Canada uses a different one than Europe. I didn't know Japan had a different one. That's kind of new to me. But yeah, you want to make sure if you're going to be bringing speakers with you, but if you're a beginner in looking at a video like this, I wouldn't ever buy one speaker over another because sometime a decade from now you might do a Japanese tour. Um, right? I wouldn't really worry about it, but it is good to know that most modern stuff, especially just from ease of manufacturing, will now just have a power supply that can do any of these and just have a switch on the back. But largely ignore it. Control system function. This is just, hey, it has a few things on it that you can adjust. That's going to vary from speaker to speaker, so don't really worry there. Now, safety features. These are always interesting and can really matter. You won't really hear the differences, so this is something to look at on a spec sheet that you won't be able to hear. So things like overexertion protection. So they have second order high pass filter. Thermal protections, auto resets, and things like that. Now, sometimes, for example, like this thermal protection, that basically means it's overheating. What's going to happen? The amp shuts down. Might not be the best option for you, right? A lot of them now just pull the volume down. Low line voltage shutdown. So that means like if you get a brownout, when it'll actually shut down kind of thing. At least I think I'm reading that right. Now, this is a big one. Driver protections. These matter. This compressor here, interesting it's saying compressor and not limiter. But most modern amplifiers and most modern active speakers that have amplifiers in the back have this. Essentially, if you overdrive it on a signal level, right, not on a thermal level of like, okay, you've been running it too hard and now it's shutting off. In this case, it is just pulling the signal down. And then low frequency roll off. This is interesting that they have like a dynamic signal level dependent thing. Most of the time, the amplifier these days will. So here we've got, this can do 45 hertz. Because of that, they probably essentially get rid of everything below about 30 hertz because it's not going to be producing any sub bass. And a lot of subwoofers have 20 hertz roll off, where everything under 20 hertz just gets destroyed because it just doesn't. I know car audio guys love their sub bass in the your home theater or in your listening space can be really nice, but it takes a crap ton of power to produce, and it doesn't usually doesn't garner much of a sound quality improvement in like a live or a live from both a DJing perspective, but also from like a live band perspective. It's just more harm than good, so usually we get rid of it. So it sounds here like they're getting rid of it at the signal level, but not 100% sure. But yeah, that's most of the specifications on a speaker that you're going to find. And I'm actually really happy with this old Mackie one. They're a great example. Now the new one, not so much. So now this is for the SRM3, and is a little bit different. So they have the 450 and the 350, which I believe is a 10 and the 12. So if we're comparing any numbers, we want to compare the 450, right? Keep 12s and 12s. Now they did keep the -3 and stuff, and the -10 rather than what QSC did, and go to a -6 here. And they are finding ways to get a little more bass out of these speakers. Now, the peak, no continuous. Come on, Mackie. We know you know it. But they just got rid of one of the numbers. They're just giving us less information. And that really sucks. And I have a set of Mackie studio monitors here in front of me. I've got a set of Mackie studio monitors at my recording studio at the store. They're great. I like them. But yeah, I don't like that they are not giving us as much information. So I'm still going to finger wag at them, even though I'm not saying, hey, don't buy their products because they're not doing this. That's not what I'm saying. I still own Mackie products, and I still think they make good stuff. One of the reasons I'm using them as an example is I'm not a Mackie dealer, because then I can talk a little more freely without worrying too much about them getting annoyed at me, but at the same time not have, any present biases, right? If I'm talking about speakers that I carry at my store, then it can be a little more like, is he saying that these numbers are good because he sells them, right? So just trying to avoid that. Anyway, yeah, they got rid of the peak, or they got rid of the continuous. So now all we have is peak. Now, it was doing 127. Now it's doing 128. The new ones aren't any louder than the old ones, which you would be forgiven if you thought they might be, because they are saying 1,000 watts peak, right? If you go on like a lot of their website material and stuff, right? I'm willing to guess, if I type in SMR 450, SMR 450 V3, 1,000 watt. First line says 1,000 watt. Ugh, that's annoying to me. Mackie, you were giving us all of this stuff, all this information. Like, I'm glad you do tell us the continuous on your sheets, right? Right, which is what this number is. So I would treat this as a 500 watt speaker. They're telling us 1,000. The 1,000 watts is good to know, I guess. But 500 watt RMS? Come on, guys. Like, that's the number that this thing's actually running at. Now, that's not bad. I recently had the misfortune of being, I was helping troubleshoot at a wedding venue that I frequently work at. Great people, but they have a Costco party speaker for running vocals through when they don't have like a DJ or sound technician there. And, it'll probably have like a 800 watt, 500 watt, 1,000 watt, like that kind of sticker on it when you first buy it, because that's the inflated peak number. The thing was probably running at like 100 watts. Like, we didn't have people at the reception area yet, and it was hard to hear the speaker in the back row at maximum volume. So that's why these wattage numbers, twofold. I understand why they have to inflate these wattage numbers, because they have to compete with like some of the flat out snake oil speakers that are out there that will say 1,000 watts when they're actually like 150. And I'm glad they're giving us this, but I miss the days of, here's how we calculated it. Right? They actually told us where they got their numbers from, where now it's, here's a few numbers, wish you the best. So now they do give us the RMS and the peak for each driver, which is nice. That's cool. But yeah, it's just the fact that they're marketing it as the 1,000 watt speaker, which if you're looking at the old ones versus the new ones, you might, like, I wouldn't blame you if you thought that these new ones were going to be quite a bit louder than the originals. We actually don't know, because the peak is 1 decibel different, but we don't know what the continuous is. I mean, I can do some math on that, right? So let's do that. Assuming they're saying 1,000 watt peak can get them 128. Reverse engineering. Okay, 1000 watt. Hey, it's probably the same driver, right? 1000 watts on a 98 gives us 128. So they're saying 500 RMS. Yeah, it's probably running 125. Why didn't they just tell us this? Why make me do this work? As well as if you're not, like, if you're watching this video, you're probably new to this stuff. You might not know it's actually that easy to calculate this out. I'm using a calculator here because I don't feel like doing the underlining math involved. But they could just tell us. But again, then it makes it easier for people to compare. Like, oh, well, that one's actually only doing 124 or 125, where their competing brand is actually saying, at least on their paperwork, that they're putting out. Yeah, it's aggravating, as you can tell. I don't really like it. Now, it looks like they may have changed the crossover frequency. Again, not that it's a big deal. And just like we were talking before about how some of these are going to have very different dispersions. One of my, I've got my QSCs are an older HPR 12-inch, and they have like a full-on like donut of a horn versus one that's a little more oval to kind of narrow it. It's probably what's happening here. And this can be the difference between use cases between something like the 350 and the 450. So this is where checking these numbers can be really important when it comes to those. Now, they have, less information than before, but they're still, again, Mackie, you're still holding true. You're giving us, RMS numbers. I appreciate that. That's okay. I'm happy. And just like I was talking about before, is the input impedances. When we start dealing with some of this stuff, that's where it starts to change when you have different types or things designed to be plugged in with different things. But you can largely ignore it unless you have a very specific use case. If you're just plugging a XLR or TRS in, don't worry about it. And just checking a few other things. Weight, mounting methods, options, disclaimer. And then a crab dip recipe. That's funny, I guess. They're not telling me. I guess. Oh yeah, say input protection. So peak and RMS limiting. So that is there's a limiter on the signal level. And amplifier thermal protection. But again, they're giving you way less information here. They're not telling you what it does. It just has it. Yeah, they do say switch mode for power supply. So they do mention that. But yeah, so like I said, they're starting to drop the amount of available information on these. And as I mentioned, QSC K12. Are they at the 0.3 already? I thought it was at 0.2 still. Manual. Loading. Yeah, these are 0.2. Okay. So I love these speakers. These QSCs sound really good. I still recommend QSC, but they've got some problems, in my opinion. Frequency response, -6, right? So this is again a reason to go and listen to the speakers. Looking at these spec sheets, the Mackies say -3. These ones are at -6. So I can't actually compare these. But if I'm the average, beginner, and I don't understand the difference here, I might not even notice this, and I might just see, oh, it's saying 50 to 20, 45 to 20 for frequency response, frequency range. That means, it's doing quite a bit better than, well, not actually all that much better, but, or actually, are they actually going lower? 47, 50. Yeah, you fudged your numbers and it's still, But again, I have a strong suspicion the K12.2 is probably going to sound better than the Mackie. It should, because I believe they're almost twice the cost. Not that pricing means everything, but yeah, guys, like, I don't like that. I don't like this -6 thing. Thankfully, they do still have the -10, so you can compare directly there. But again, don't use that as your main driver of like, I'm going to pick this speaker because this one goes to 45 hertz instead of the other one that I was looking at that goes to 52. Listen to it. Listen to them. Okay. Coverage, angles, that kind of thing. But again, here, class D, peak, 1800 watt, 225 watt. It's the only info here. Okay. I mean, they do tell you about cooling and stuff. Now, is this the one? I think it was the original K12 that got me really annoyed. And yeah, again, oh, no, it is here. So maximum SPL 132. Really impressive number. 132 dB. That's like super crazy loud. But then we see this little one here. If you can see that. There's just this little one right there. Traveling through, where do they, where is that one? Is that not anywhere? On. Are they not going to tell me what their asterisk means? They very specifically have an asterisk there. And I remember this really annoying me. Shoot, I think it might have been on the K12, but this is what that one is supposed to mean. QSC K12 manual. K series. Is this the original? I'm hoping it's not the exact same one, because apparently it's missing. You shouldn't put that there and then not tell me why it's there. Unless it's in a larger, like, hey, find this in the full manual versus the quick start guide or something. I don't know. Let's get down to the spec sheet on here. Oh, I saw it. I saw it. Here we go. Oh, and of course this one's in. Oh, I must have missed it on the English. Exciting times. All right. It's still not telling me that info. I'm actually confused now. 131. Specifications subject to change without notice. Did it change? Grr. The caveat I'm looking for is missing. They have a disclaimer that, hey, there's a thing here. They're not telling me what it is. That's really annoying. Maybe it was on the K. Okay, last try. Thankfully, I can edit this out on my... oh, I already have this one open. Shoot. Here we go. K-Series specs. Just the spec page. Ha! Oh, and then all right. Now this is even more annoying now that I see this. So they have that 1 here. Again, they have this 1 on the maximum sound pressure level saying 131 dB peak. They don't actually, on this other one for some reason, tell me what that 1 means. That's a little annoying, and sent me on a goose chase. Here's what that 1 means. Because they have 2 numbers here. They have 1, and then they got 2. Now, at least here, they told us continuous, right? On the original spec sheet, 1000 watt, Class D, 500 watt, 500 watt, which is a bit crazy. Like, they must be using some different tech than what Mackie's using, because they're sending 500 watts to the high frequency. But 2000 watts peak. All right, cool, I guess. 2. They've got a 1 and they got a 2. We scroll down to these. I'm going to, for comparison purposes and in accordance with common industry practices, maximum peak SPL specifications are theoretical calculations based upon transducer sensitivity and peak available amplifier power. So this number was calculated using this number. Hey, at least on this sheet, they're telling me that. On the other one, it just had a 1, and then that led to nothing, which I think is actually a missed thing. I have a suspicion there's a spec sheet somewhere that is just a spec sheet that this is copied out of, and then has that somewhere on that spec sheet, and this just got left over from there. So I will forgive them for this, although that's a little weird. But here, so they're saying that 131 dB peak is based off of this number. That's how they did their math. Okay. I scroll down a bit. 2 was done independent of limiters and driver protection circuits. So what that means, this can never, the circuit cannot do what they are saying. The way they have the speaker built, it will not put out this volume. And that is really annoying. That way of explaining this is really, really shady to me. I'm not happy with QSC, even though I do like these speakers. These speakers, inflating these numbers and like manipulating these numbers in a completely legal and legitimate way in some respects, I hate it. So you're using a theoretical number that in order to have this number actually ever happen, you would have to go in and remove the limiters from the circuit and the driver protections from the circuit in order to hit this number. But then you use that to calculate the SPL numbers. I just don't get it. I just don't get it, especially because the K12, I love them. They're a great speaker. They're, to me, a very good sounding, particularly, I like them for dealing with live bands. I find that if I have a set of QSCs, they're going to sound good with, whatever band I'm working with, whatever style of music I'm pumping through it, etc. Versus, I find some companies tend to work better for more bass-heavy music, or they tend to work better for pre-recorded music. Some tend to work better for live music. I find the K12s, they just kind of work really well for everything. They are a jack of all trades without being too much of a sacrifice. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend K12 speakers and QSC speakers to anybody, but this stuff just drives me up the wall, because they don't need to do this. You don't. And I don't know why you do. If somebody from QSC ever sees this, reach out to me. Explain to me why this is a good idea. Now, I kind of know why you do it. You're trying to compete with companies that do inflate these numbers, right? And as they say, it is a common industry practice. I get it, I guess. But does it need to be? Right? These older Mackies, they told us how they came up with their numbers. They gave us a sensitivity. I can calculate it out myself and do reverse engineer their math pretty easily and see kind of what's going on. They gave me continuous and they gave me peak. Sweet. Right? They're giving me -3, makes it nice and easy. The newer ones take out some of that information annoyingly, and they only give me peak, but because they give me RMS and peak for the amplifier rating, I can reverse engineer and figure out what the continuous probably is, right? At least I've got that. But with this QSC spec sheet, I can't. I do not know of any way technically speaking, I guess. So this is rated to continuous, 2000 watt. I could do, so this is 131. Where's my, they're 131. That means, that might mean, or no, they're running 1000 watts. They're saying 2000 watt peak to give me one. It might be the exact same as the Mackie, because that had 1000 watts, 128. So as I've said before, generally speaking, take 3 dB off if all they give you is peak. I shouldn't have to do any extra work to know what your speakers are actually capable of, right? Because, yeah, I can continuously run this. Sweet. That's great. I guess show me this number. That's fine. But this, neither of these numbers mean anything, and you explain why they mean nothing. But it's in the fine print. It's stuff that, I don't think a new DJ or a new sound tech or somebody working in a band that's like, hey, we need to set it. The spec sheet starts to mean less and less, which again, go and listen to them, because the K12s, they sound really good. I know some people don't like them. I do. These Mackies, the 450s that have been around forever, they sound pretty good. I think the SRM 450s hold up pretty well. And then the newer versions, I'm assuming probably, sound a little bit better. Because if not, why do a new iteration? But yeah, the spec sheets, if you're a new sound tech, if you're a new DJ, I do not blame you for needing some assistance in reading these, because they're becoming more and more purposefully obtuse. It's the best way I can put it. And it's really annoying. And now there are some companies that are far worse than this, right? At least they're giving us numbers that I can, again, reverse engineer from. This was the 0.2, 132 peak with that thing there. Yeah, this new spec sheet for the 0.2 doesn't even give me RMS or continuous. It just gives me peak, right? So they're getting worse every step of the way. We're losing information all the time, and it sucks. But they don't have to. There are some, if you go and you look up a speaker and all it tells you is peak wattage and doesn't have a SPL rating, don't buy it. Without listening to it and testing its limits yourself, there's no way to know in any semblance how loud it goes, which means they're probably embarrassed by it. Again, that speaker I was telling you about, not going to name its brand name, but they bought it from the same place they buy the ground beef, and it just wasn't putting out nearly enough volume for its use case, right? And if you read the box, it'll tell you a giant wattage number. Yeah, but as you can tell, like I said, I use QSC as an example for this stuff. I'm sure, like I said, I think there's far worse out there where they lean so much more on the wattage that I think they companies that lean too heavily on their wattage are doing themselves and their clients a disservice. Because if a customer comes in and they see a speaker on the wall or on the in the display room, it says 1,000 watts across it, big sticker, 1,000 watts, and then they plug it in, and it doesn't go as loud as they think it should. It just creates more and more distrust, right? So then when this company is telling them 1,000 watts, and it is legitimately on 1,000 watts, they're not going to trust it. So then this company though has to go and say, well, we're actually doing 2,000 watts. Not those companies doing 1,000 watts. Oh, you don't even have to worry about that. We're doing 2,000 watts, even though we're actually only doing 1,000, because that other company that claims 1,000, at least the Mackie, again, I'm quite happy. I remember this being worse. I'm happy they are telling me the RMS. Sweet, 500 watts. Look at this as a 500-watt speaker. But you kind of almost have to look at it as a 1,000-watt speaker if you're comparing it to these modern ads, because, well, your competition, and I'm not talking about QSC here, but there are companies out there that will be claiming 2,000 watts that are probably doing 300. That's terrible. At least this makes sense, right? 500-watt RMS, 1,000-watt peak. I understand that. My head wraps around that completely. They explain exactly where all the power is going. Cool. QSC, they're getting worse. The speakers aren't, but they're in their spec sheets are getting worse. Like the K12.2 is, like I said, it's one of my favorites. I've got HPRs right now, and I love them. And if they ever break down, QSC is still going to be on my maybe. But yeah. So long story short, yeah, if you're looking into speakers, that's how you read the spec sheets. But I don't know if you should necessarily trust them, which is really unfortunate. Yeah. Well, that's what I want to do for that recording. Recording saved. C drive /users/owner. Oh, now that I'm all annoyed at that, do I want to talk about anything else? No, I think that's gonna be good for today. I had a few people pop in. That's cool. I'm mostly doing these to fill in the gap while I get around editing some stuff. But yeah,